Okay, here's my audience of at least 5 people. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. Cats. Okay.
Violent video games have encouraged the killing of innocent people for sport.
That was Senator Grassley from Iowa. And he's right, says Franklin.
This argument is used time and time again. It is used by senators, congressmen, and prominent members of the media. I'm here to persuade you that violent video games do not cause violent acts. I have played video games my whole life, and I have cited extensive research from unbiased sources. It is important to recognize that the twisting of facts that is happening here, as well as using video games as a scapegoat for violent attacks. It is also misinforming parents of the true nature of the effects of violent video gaming. I will walk you through the problem of rampant video game blaming, and I will explain where the stigmas come from. I will also explain how we can combat this through education. Anytime a violent actor commits a violent crime and is a gamer, gaming is blamed as the cause. It is important to note that a Pew survey has shown that 50% of adults play video games and 72% of teens also play video games. Therefore, any legislation stemming from these feelings of blame would affect all of these gamers, not to mention the multi-billion-dollar gaming industry. Not only could legislation affect gamers, legislation dealing with the play of games by children can affect the rights of parents and what a parent decides is fit for the children to play. To explain this in a story, I started playing my first violent video game when I was probably in 3rd or 4th grade, which there's some laws that were proposed that completely ban violent games by younger children. And that decision was reached by my parents, considering that I was mature enough at the time to handle this World War II themed video game. That's an experience that gave me connections with friends and other social groups that I wouldn't have otherwise if some of these laws and over legislation were done. So the reasoning also is, some of these violent mass shootings that happen, video games are blamed time and time again as a major cause. Now, some reasons that these causes might, come to about, like why do people view video games in this negative light? Studies done on violent video game effects are done with bias or are cited out of context. Christopher Ferguson, the psychology chair at Stetson University, states that many studies have used flawed procedures to get results that fit the needs or their political motivations. An example of this is that one such study he cited, after playing violent video games, people were given sort of a quiz to gauge their aggression or non-aggression response to the control of not playing video games. One such question on this was to fill in the blank of a 4-letter word. So you were given the letters K-I. People that were considered aggressive filled in those last 2 letters with L-L, spelling kill, versus people that answered S-S, spelling kiss. And this is one of the terms they use to say that it's an aggressive response to violent gaming, which, if you ask me, is a pretty long stretch to make that as your only point of data in a quiz. Another type of example would be there's, after some of these mass shootings, there was a political upheaval about, what's the real cause. And some studies were commissioned by specific political groups to say that, hey, let's find a reason that this actually links to that. And these studies were then found that exact link without citing any counter arguments and just basically making the data fit what they were looking for. Another example of this would be citing out of context. So using research data but isn't used accurately. And I have an example for you. This is in reference to a Supreme Court case that was decided in 2011 which struck down the 2005 California law banning sale of video games to all minors that are considered to have violent content. It's the Brown versus the Electronic Merchants Association. Let me play that for you now.
So that's headed to the Supreme Court. Drug interesting.
Opinion piece. They say that the connection between game violence and aggression is as strong as the medical association between cigarette smoking and lung cancer. Do you believe that these games actually make children more aggressive and violent in their everyday lives?
Well, I think if you look at juvenile crime statistics with
So I did slightly cut off that video, not a perfect system, but the people that they were referencing, the association is the American Pediatric Association. And although they use that, and it sounds like a good statistic, because the American Pediatric Association is known to have good guidelines on the care of children and what's beneficial to them, they're using the source to say that this would cause actual violence or aggressive behavior in children, which isn't at all the studies that they're actually using. The American Pediatric Association based their findings on not recommending violent video games, or at least limiting their use based upon aggressive emotions or slightly a loss of empathy, which I'm not saying is not a bad thing. but they're using this to say that violent video games cause violent behavior, which isn't accurate. A more recent publication by the American Psychological Association, it had a task force on violent video gaming, and this was to review all studies. To be precise, they reviewed 150 research reports, including data from 2003 to present. Of all the studies, only one even attempted to measure criminal behavior versus the effects of playing violent video games, so actually measuring if behavior actually happened. Considering the small sample size, this test was basically thrown out as not being valid. It's like having your football team lose by 60 points and claiming the one safety was the reason that they lost, not citing all the other bad offense or defense or anything else that actually occurred, just picking out this one little issue that you can maybe make work, say it's a bad thing. I mean, safety is one of the worst things you can do as an embarrassment as an offense, correct? For most people that know football. But to make this conclusion that video game violence causes actual violence, just there's no basis in any kind of fact or studies. Excuse me. This is also, considering that that's the only study found to really even measure it in the past, 10, 15 years, it's important to realize that this is the most quoted point in media, by media and politicians. They always say that, it's studied that video games cause aggression, video games cause violence, and they mean that in the sense that it causes the violent activities, where only one study even cites this. So you can see how this could be the cause of people's feelings because a complete misinterpretation of data. And because of this misinterpretation of data, we need a solution to educate people on the correct way of doing things. Media and politicians and parents need to do their research and cite sources accurately when discussing causes from video game violence. They can do this by education. In a well-written piece from CNN Wire, it explains that although there are links found with aggressive behavior, no violent behavior can be predicted from playing violent video games. The reason I bring up this article, because it's kind of restating what I've already told you, is this is a more recently published article, and this article is voiced and termed with complete fairness to both sides. It brings up the possibility of a connection, but says there's no actual connection. So instead of just using political bias, instead of just citing sources to their needs and using what information they want, they give you both sides without actually making you disillusioned to what's really being said here. Another important thing to do is to bring in unbiased types of data to corroborate what you're thinking. And one such study, another study by the American Psychological Association, a separate study, was done with the rhetoric of people talk about video game violence versus the actual data. I've blown up a chart to kind of explain some of those findings, and basically what it's saying is that with the sale of violent video games, so in the times of November, this covers 4 years from 2007 to 2011, and the middle chart here is the trend of homicides, and the bottom would be aggravated assaults. So I'm going to bring it closer to you in a moment, but the times when video games sell the most, which is November holiday season, and that's like the blockbuster, very violent video games like Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto, games like that. The sales spike clearly in the holiday season, and at that same time, homicides fall, and so do aggravated assaults. So let me bring that a little closer so both the camera can see it, and you can all see it if you can't. So it's not necessarily, their conclusion wasn't that video games are the complete cause of this downgrade, but it's to show that the the significant increase in video game sales, which people, these are the violent ones in particular that are the most popular, would cause more violence is just completely unfounded. And also shows that, there is no connection that can be made there. And I understand that asking media and politicians to change is not the most realistic thing to expect, because we've been wanting them to change for all of time. But it is realistic for parents to change, to understand that they can actually research these topics on their own and not just make judgments based on their moral beliefs, actually look at the actual studies that are done. Because in the end, it does come down to the experience you want your kids to have and when you think they're really ready for this kind of exposure. I have explained why blaming video games for violence is flawed, and I've shown where this stigma against violent video games comes from, and importantly, we know how to combat it with education. We also know that it's most important for media and political leaders to change, because with their change, this is the most change for everyone, because more people are going to see that versus just, a parent here, they're actually doing the research themselves. And I hope that you now agree that violent video games do not cause violent actions, and I've, gotten this information from both my personal life experiences and the unbiased sources I've cited. The facts are being twisted, and sometimes video games are used as a scapegoat for violent activities. It's complete misinformation to parents everywhere. I'll leave you all with a quote from Mark Twain. Often the surest way to convey misinformation is to tell the strict truth. Thank you. Just going to show you all one more time that you're still here. No one abandoned me. All right. Thank you all for coming.